A property tax debate is raging in Illinois. Who's to blame for the high property taxes in the land of Lincoln? We'll talk about why some people are rationing water, self-rationing in Pennsylvania. And we have election and campaign news from several states and various corners of the country. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, April 2nd. I'm Jim Talamonti in for Greg Bishop today. So let's start in Greg's home state, the state of Illinois, where property taxes are among the highest in the nation. And there was quite a debate this week about property taxes in Illinois. And it really got started on Monday when Governor J.B. Pritzker was in Chicago and he talked to reporters at an event unrelated involving the General Consular Corps of Chicago. But he was asked after delivering a speech about property taxes and how residents might get property tax relief. And so the governor, in his remarks, pointed the finger at local governments. Let's hear what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say Monday.
Well, I want to remind you that property taxes are not determined by the state of Illinois, but rather by local governments, indeed local units of government, including school boards, park boards, library boards, municipalities, etc. So I think people sometimes get confused. I know the Republican Party in Illinois is quite confused and thinks that this is a state issue when it is actually a local issue.
Now, the governor went on to say that the state government, in his budget, since he's been governor in 2019, the state's been funding public education at a higher level, and therefore local governments should not have to raise property taxes as much as they have. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, as you might expect, after the remarks about the Illinois GOP, Illinois House Republican leader Toni McCombie had some comments when she had a press conference just a couple of days later at the Illinois Capitol with fellow Republican State Rep Dan Ugasti. Here's what Toni McCombie said.
Governor, people are not confused. Republicans are not confused. We Republicans are trying to do our job, and we are certainly not passing the blame to locals. We blame you, your policies, and your priorities. We are also not the ones proposing tax hikes to fund out-of-control spending and out-of-touch priorities.
And McCombie and Ugasti also talked about specific pieces of legislation that they have introduced that they say would help bring property taxes down in Illinois. They, again, talked about the spending in Illinois, how budgets under Governor Pritzker have increased exponentially each year since he has been in the governor's office. The man who helped break this down for us at thecentersquare.com is with Americans for Prosperity Illinois, Brian Christen. I talked to Brian about the property tax situation and suggested that local governments are pointing at state officials are pointing at local governments. And so I asked Brian, it told us it seems like nobody's taking charge. Brian Christen with Americans for Prosperity Illinois.
Locals are not taking responsibility. They're pointing fingers at the state government, and the state government is pointing them right back. And as a result, we have total incompetence in the state of Illinois when it comes to the issue of property taxes. It's no surprise that we have the number one property taxes in the nation. We have catastrophic situations going on in the state of Illinois. I'll point to like the city of Harvey, for example, where property taxes are above 4.5% for residents. What you see in a situation like that, when you have runaway property taxes, is communities die. People leave. Homes get foreclosed upon. They get abandoned. Businesses leave. They go to other states. If 4.5 property tax rates are okay for Governor Pritzker, he is co-signing the state of Illinois to economic ruin.
That's Brian Christen. Now, there are several pieces of legislation introduced, not just by Republicans, also by Democrats at the State House, aimed at addressing property taxes. There is also a resolution proposed by State Rep LaShawn Ford, who is also a Democratic nominee for Congress. He's a Chicago Democrat on the west side of the city, aiming to replace Danny Davis, who's retiring after decades in Congress. And Ford's resolution would be for a constitutional amendment, which would be needed in Illinois in order to impose a millionaire's tax. Income over $1 million would be taxed with a 3% surcharge. And as the proposal stands, we'd be looking at half of the money generated from that to go to property tax relief for people who have a homestead exemption. The other half would go to public education. So that's a debate we'll be watching. The Illinois legislature continues in its 2026 session until the end of May. So that's something that Greg Bishop and all of us at thecentersquare.com will be keeping a close eye on, because this property tax debate will not go away, especially as affordability continues to be a hot button word, as you might say, around the United States. And Illinois is certainly no exception. Well, let's talk about water and how that relates to economics, and how some residents in Pennsylvania are actually self-rationing, or so it sounds. Fascinating story. It's great reporting from Pennsylvania. We're very pleased to be joined by Center Square's Northeast Regional Editor Christen Smith. Christen, thanks so much for joining us today. And let's talk about the water situation in Pennsylvania. We've heard in the past about droughts affecting some of the southern states like Georgia, California, when there have been issues there. What in the world's going on in Pennsylvania, and why would people be very concerned about taking showers or perhaps not even flushing the toilet?
Well, unlike those regions, it's not a natural disaster. It's corporate takeovers of public water systems. This is something that's been on the rise in Pennsylvania since 2016, and it's having a lot of unintended consequences in the decades since. And so now we've come to a place where people are limiting showers and flushing the toilets less often. You have people who are experiencing their water bills doubling. In one case of a man in Exeter, he pays $175 a month for just himself. Another family pays $275 for 3 people. So these are exorbitant prices, particularly for those who are living on fixed incomes and who are already dealing with higher property taxes, higher electricity rates, higher costs for groceries, and now higher costs for water.
And we've had somewhat of an issue like this in Illinois come up last year, where municipalities have sold off their water systems, and people have seen bills increase. In some cases in Illinois, the actual water quality went down with some people in the north and northwest suburban area around Chicago. What's the response there from these private water companies, and how can they justify these rates going so high compared to what they were as part of a municipal water system?
Their argument is that it's a snowball effect of buying these public systems that have been neglected for decades. There's been a reticence to invest and raise rates over the years from local officials who are worried about things like re-election. So these water companies are coming in and saying, hey, to get these systems up to snuff to prevent further fines or water pollution, they need to invest in these systems, and ratepayers unfortunately have to help pay for that investment. There is a case out in 2019. There was a lack of upgrades to a system out there in Exeter, and they were having failing equipment, repeated overflows. In one case, there was a $4 million gallon sewage spill. So these are a lot of things that these water companies have to address, and it takes millions upon millions of dollars, and they can't absorb that all to themselves, they said. So that this is truly a safety issue from their perspective, but it's obviously something that residents weren't prepared for when this law was enacted.
Christen Smith at thecentersquare.com. Christen, reporter Ford Turner talked with a number of people dealing with these bills, and one individual said his bill actually doubled. And you gave one number that was pretty high, but some of these numbers are eating up to near $300. And here in Illinois, Greg Bishop and I will complain about affordability issues, but you're blowing us out of the water, pun intended, when it comes to these water bills. What's the fix here? What's the solution? Is there anything people in public office can do?
Lawmakers aren't entirely sure of the solution. What they want is to put a 1-year pause on any further takeovers. And the idea through a bill that's been recently introduced is that they would put a 1-month pause, a 1-year pause, put together a working group to figure out how do we prevent this issue going forward. Now, obviously, there is going to continue to be needs for upgrades in systems. They're not saying that that should not happen at all, but they need to review the law that was enacted in 2016 and try to correct for some of these unintended consequences that have happened as a result.
I can't help but think it was a little over 10 years ago in Brazil. There were actually promos running on television encouraging people to avoid flushing and save water by urinating in the shower. So we haven't come to any proposals like that yet, have we, in Pennsylvania?
No, not yet. The most controversial is probably tying rate increases to voter referendums, but certainly we have not faced the level of rationing that maybe you've even seen out west in droughts or, down in South America, like you just mentioned.
So I guess the bottom line here for people in Exeter Township and other communities that are facing this, is there any immediate relief in sight? I mean, the pause may help, so to speak, or at least for some period of time till a better fix can be found. But in the meantime, is there any way to help people deal with these bills that have suddenly gotten so high, as you said, especially with the other inflation and other affordability issues that people are dealing with?
Unfortunately, other than self-rationing, there isn't much that residents can do other than budget more for their water bills, but that's not as simple as it sounds. And unfortunately, just like so many other parts of this economy, it ultimately falls on the taxpayer to make up the difference. This is why we do what we do at the Center Square, to continue to follow what is hitting you in the wallet. And in Pennsylvania, that affordability word that's really taken up space in the legislature. This is just one of those things that continues to be left on the backs of taxpayers with no end in sight.
One of the issues discussed in Ford's story involved fair market value type valuations that are used to buy distressed systems. And again, we've seen that dynamic play out in some other states as well. And so there was talk from a representative from the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates from Tennessee said that commissions, it had to do with commissioners or commissions considering rate impact of acquisitions at the time, so that these types of things could be addressed before a sale goes through. So it looks like that may be part of this legislation.
Yes, and that is a more complex. That's a more complex solution than I think that we have time to get into, but absolutely that's another piece of this. Like I said, it's a complex problem with a lot of issues to resolve. It's not just a matter of corporate greed taking over these water systems. It's very much, how do they save these systems from themselves without pushing all of that onto ratepayers?
Yeah, and I guess when you talk about infrastructure dollars, this is one of those situations where using them properly and but at the same time making sure things are maintained also plays into that equation. Because if what the private companies are saying is that they had to do all this work, well, then I guess it would lead you to believe that something had to be done. At the same time, if that money was budgeted when these were under government control and those upgrades weren't happening, then that brings, again, we're really getting into the weeds here, but this could bring up a whole new set of questions. I guess perhaps that's why there's this pause, because there's so many questions still to be answered, right, Christen?
Yeah, Pennsylvania loves to answer questions with a working group, generally for a year or 18 months. So this is just a typical pattern for us, although it truly is a problem that lawmakers have been grappling with for years. So this is really the first step in the direction of addressing this. So even though it doesn't sound like much, a group to get together and talk about the problems that we're already talking about here, it is a positive step forward to potentially having legislation that would go somewhere to help fix this problem.
Well, we certainly hope that something can happen, because then I'm sure this is, as these acquisitions happen, this may affect other states. We've seen more isolated cases in Illinois, but we haven't seen, I don't think, those kind of numbers and those kind of water bills. And so it's just going to make me think twice before I get to refill my glass here. But, Christen, fantastic work as always. Thank you so much for joining us and shedding some light on this. More on this story at thecentersquare.com, and we'll continue to monitor that. So continue to keep an eye on Pennsylvania and other states around the country that deal with these water issues at thecentersquare.com. Once again, Jim Talamonti filling in for Greg Bishop today. We have a lot going on around the United States, and so let's take a look at some of the issues that are impacting taxpayers around the United States on this 2nd of April, as we look forward to what for some will be an extended weekend due to the Easter and Passover holidays. But while the water costs are affecting Pennsylvania, we have America's Talking, quick hits to get into around the United States. And let's start in the state of Florida. We have several election-related issues in Florida. SAVE Act signed into law. This is something that President Donald Trump has been pushing at a national level. There's been a whole bunch of debate about it, especially regarding U.S. senators and their action or inaction on that subject. But Governor Ron DeSantis, proud to get that piece of legislation signed into law in Florida that he and supporters say will help with election integrity. We also have campaign news from the trail in North Carolina, where we look at the race there, where the former governor, Roy Cooper, looking very good in the race for the U.S. Senate there, as Cooper 14%. With that 14% lead over the Republican Whatley in that race. So the former governor maintaining that popularity. There doesn't, at least at this point, seem to be voter fatigue in terms of the former governor moving toward a Senate seat in that November election in North Carolina. We also have a campaign update out west in the state of Nevada, where we have news related to the campaign there. And in this situation, a little bit tighter race, as opposed to that 14% discrepancy. It's too close to call at this point. And again, well ahead of the November election, but in what is often a hotly contested state in various situations, various seats for public office. You've got the two leading candidates tied right now in that battle. And then there's the state of New York. Things aren't quite so simple in that gubernatorial race. We have questions regarding funding and how Democrats with the Campaign Finance Board are denying Republican candidate Bruce Blakeman access to the state's public financing system. And of course, New York Republicans tend to have not nearly the amount of campaign dollars Democrats do. And this news comes in New York as Blakeman has been showing some gains in the polls. And while still significantly behind Kathy Hochul, the incumbent Democrat governor, he has been posting gains. And so it'll be interesting to see how this, obviously not having those advertising dollars, could really throw a wrench into Blakeman's campaign. On the other hand, could public opinion then turn in the underdog's favor? That's another thing we'll be watching. And again, at thecentersquare.com, we'll be keeping a close eye on that race with, again, Hochul, at least as our headline shows this week, losing ground a little bit to Bruce Blakeman in the race for New York governor. And we have all kinds of other news around the country we'll be keeping an eye on when it comes to races as we get into the spring and summer months, and of course throughout the fall at thecentersquare.com. All kinds of issues, election related and campaign related as well. And as always, we'll keep it with a real taxpayer focus as we cover these at thecentersquare.com. So we certainly invite you to like, share, and subscribe our stories on all of your favorite platforms. We again look forward to having more stories impacting taxpayers at the Center Square and here at the Center Square Daily tomorrow. Thanks all for joining us today. We look forward to Greg Bishop's return next week. But again, more tomorrow, Friday, at the Center Square Daily.